Well, believe it or not, today's your second last lecture. So just one more and then you're all done, believe it or not. So today is really what I would call the last hurrah. This is the one that the last learning plan that takes a little bit to just kind of wrap your mind around it and get an understanding of what's going on. Learning plan 12, which we'll be covering next week, is a relatively light learning plan. Nothing. It's basically review and just talking about the digestive system. So this really is the last one that requires a little bit of, like I said, a little bit of thought, a little bit of brain power to kind of just understand some of the concepts that we're talking about. What we're going to be talking about this week is the correlation of the components of the immune system to their functions, which basically means we're going to be talking about the immune system and how it works. That's basically it. So in general A&P, we talked about the lymphatic system, and the lymphatic system and the immune system are a little bit different. The lymphatic system is where the components of the immune system live and work. So we're going to be talking about the different ways that your body provides immunity for itself. We're going to be talking about things like natural killer cells, T cells, B cells, and so on and so forth. They all have to go somewhere. They all have to live and work somewhere, and they live and work in the lymphatic system. So within lymph nodes or lymphatic tissue, lymphatic organs, but we're not going to really concentrate on the residence or the workplace of these structures. We're going to talk about what these structures do as we talk today. Now, if you have the time and you want to, I highly recommend when you go on a blackboard, and I can show you here, I highly recommend that you check out an interactive that I put there for you. So if you go into Blackboard and Learning Plan 11, you come down here and it says, for assistance with your Learning Plan 11 lab assignment, please visit this interaction. If you click here, it'll take you to something called interactive physiology, and this is a demo version of it. So there might be some. This in itself is complete, but you just don't get the whole interactive physiology suite of all the different systems. But anyway, these different systems here, they're all interactive, and they're really, really good about explaining what we're going to be talking about today. So if you want another way to look at this, if you want to use this as part of your studying, I highly recommend it. It's interactive, so you click on things. Now this is starting to get archaic. I mean, this thing is getting to be pretty old. So I mean, the technology has come a long way. So it might seem like, you know, Oregon Trail again, you know, where it's real archaic, but it's still kind of one of those things where at least even though it's not the prettiest thing to look at, and you're looking at it like, oh my gosh, when is this from? Like it's probably from the 90s, but the information is really good, and it's very accurate, and it's very detailed. So regardless of how it looks and how it sounds and the technology, it's actually a really good interaction. So that's something that you may want to look at. So I'm going to go over here and get into the PowerPoint, and let's start talking about the immune system. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about your body's defenses that you have all the time from the moment you're born. These are not defenses that you have to develop. They're not specific defense mechanisms. These are non-specific, stop everything type of defenses. And so we call these types of defenses our innate defenses. And so if you look at the top of this picture here, you can see that we have the surface barriers, which we start off talking about in the notes. So that would be like your skin and your mucous membranes. These are things that are going to stop pathogens from entering your body. Someone coughs on your skin. If you walk over to the sink and wash it off with soap and water, for the most part, you're eliminating your risk, or I should say eliminate, you're decreasing your risk of that pathogen affecting you. That's why we have our mucous membranes that are exposed to the external environment. Our mucous membranes produce mucus, which are designed to stick. So that as you breathe in or you ingest food, the idea is that the pathogens will get stuck in the mucus, immobilizing them so that they cannot move and they cannot infect your body. So that's an additional physical barrier. We also have protective chemicals, which isn't shown here as the surface barrier, but we have protective chemicals. We have enzymes. We have acids on our skin and various structures of the body. These are designed to destroy the microorganisms or make it very uncomfortable for them to live. We have mucin that creates sticky traps. We have antimicrobial peptides, other things that our body secretes in order to help ward off the pathogens. So the idea here with these surface barriers is to basically form a wall around the inside environment of your body that is susceptible to infection, because the pathogens want to get into our bodies and replicate. They don't care whether they make us sick. They don't care whether they injure us. All they want to do is further their own species, which is finding a place that is nice, warm, moist, great place to live. And then they'll start reproducing. But then it affects us in a negative way, because that's what we call an infection or sickness, illness. And then we have our body has to take measures in order to prevent the furthering of the development of that organism. But then if by chance the pathogen makes its way into our body, which it can, there are a lot of different places where things can get into your body. Through our mouth, through an open cut in the skin, through our eyes, you name it. Anything that's open to the external environment, that's a portal that pathogens can get in. So if they do get in, then we have what we call internal defenses. And these internal defenses, which you see listed here, these internal defenses are going to be protecting your body from those pathogens, but again, they're non-specific. So they're just looking for things that don't belong, that aren't part of your body. And then they're going to do their best to eliminate them. So we'll start with the phagocytes. The phagocytes, these are basically these cells that will kind of stick to a pathogen and then surround it and then gobble it up and then destroy it. We call that phagocytosis. We also have neutrophils and macrophages. And they can also engulf pathogens and digest them. So you'll see in places where there's an infectious process taking place, the neutrophils and those macrophages are going to be usually found close by, because they're moving in to try to engulf, for example, bacteria, pathogens that don't belong. We also have natural killer cells. Natural killer cells are responsible for cell-on-cell combat. So if they come upon a cell that is infected, what they'll do is they'll destroy the cell. Now, I want to differentiate between killing the cell and killing the pathogen. All right? So let's say that we have a cell. We have a cell. And inside the cell, we have a bunch of viruses. Okay? So if this cell is infected with a virus, the natural killer cell will attach to the infected cell and kill the cell that is infected. But it's not going to kill the bacteria. It's not going to kill the viruses inside. And so our cells will eventually develop, in response to the viral infection, some proteins, which are called interferons, and I'll explain those in a little bit, that will basically make the cell untouchable by the bacteria. I'm sorry, I keep saying bacteria, I mean virus. So what you're doing is you're destroying the home in which the viruses live, but you're not destroying the virus. That'd be like if you got a bunch of criminals living in a rundown house and you go and you burn down the house, and the criminals are going to run away, but at least you destroyed the house that they live in, so they can't go back there. So the viruses need the cell, because the way the viruses work is that the virus will infect the cell and then hijack the cell's reproductive capabilities. So a virus will attach to a cell, and then the virus will say, okay, you're not going to make more of you, now you're going to make more of me. And so the cell now becomes a factory that makes more viruses. And because that cell can't reproduce its own self, then the cell is eventually going to die. And when the cell dies, it breaks apart, releasing all those new viruses to go find another cell to infect. And then each of those goes and finds a cell and infects that cell. So when we start off with a viral infection, the viruses have the upper hand until the cells get wind of what's going on, and then the cells take protective measures to make sure that the virus is not allowed in. Okay, so those are the natural killer cells. They're going to go ahead and kill an infected cell. This is the generalized version, the non-specific version of something else we're going to see later, which is called the cytotoxic T cell. So the cytotoxic T cell is just like a natural killer cell, except it's specially trained. It's specially developed to go after a specific type of pathogen, whereas the natural killer cell does not. It goes after anything. We also have inflammation. Inflammation is, the purpose of inflammation is to do a couple things. Number one, to make the environment uncomfortable for the pathogen, and number two, to help us repair ourselves if there's damage to tissues and so forth. And then we also have, well, let me go on because I bet you I got some slides on this stuff. Okay, so let's go back and look at the macrophages, which is a type of phagocyte. So what the phagocyte is going to do is it's going to stick to the pathogens. Looks like we have some rod bacilli here, a bacterium. So what's going to happen is it's going to stick to the pathogen. It's going to engulf it. It's going to bring it in, and it's going to create a pocket around it. Then it's going to take that pocket and introduce what we call a lysosome, which will basically digest and break apart that pathogen, and then it'll spit out the debris. But now that bacterium is no longer going to affect the body in the way that it would have. It can't reproduce. It can't, that'd be like taking a person and pulling apart their body into millions of pieces. Well, that person is dead. They can't reproduce anymore. Talk about inflammation. So inflammation, like I said, is designed to enhance the immune response, to get rid of the pathogen, to make things uncomfortable for the pathogen, but also to help repair any damage. So, for example, if you cut your skin, whenever we injure a tissue, we have the release of chemicals, inflammatory chemicals, and something that's going to attract the white blood cells. So then we make more white blood cells. They come to the injured area, and then they start to carry out phagocytosis. We've got a lot of white blood cells coming to the area and chewing up the bacteria and spitting out. There's a lot of debris. The white blood cells eventually die because they have a relatively short lifespan. That's what we see as pus. The formation of pus are those white blood cells that are basically chewing up and spitting out the pathogen and then dying on the spot. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to clear the debris and trying to clear out the pathogens. But also, over here, what we're trying to do is we're trying to basically flush the area out, clean the area out, and start the healing process. So we're going to see that the vasculature is going to dilate, bringing more blood flow to the area so that we can heal faster. Also, secondary to this is the increase in heat, which is going to make it uncomfortable for those pathogens to live. They don't like being in a higher temperature. But it's also going to increase the metabolic rate of cells so that they heal faster. The capillaries are going to become more permeable. That's going to cause everything to swell because more fluid, more proteins that are usually held back now are going to be getting into the tissue spaces. So we're going to see that the area is going to be swollen, and because of that, it's going to distend and stretch the tissue, so it's going to be a little painful. Severe enough, impairment of function. So these four things are the cardinal signs of inflammation: heat, redness, pain, and swelling. Again, these are all intended to help the body, number one, heal itself, and number two, clear out any pathogens and prevent any infection that may occur. So that's your first term for today, inflammation. We also have what are called antimicrobial proteins. Now let me go through here. I guess, trying to see if we want to see what's next here. So I might be going in a different, okay, I'm going in a different direction here. Okay. Where am I here? Oh, okay, we got it. Okay, so before I go on to the antimicrobial proteins and so forth, let's just review a couple things. So let's say, for example, this is just showing you how the leukocytes enter the area where the infection is, because the leukocytes are found in the blood vessels. So let's say that there's a puncture through the skin and it penetrates into the dermis. Well, on whatever caused the puncture, there might be, let's say, bacteria. So now we've introduced bacteria to the internal environment of the body. So when we have those inflammatory chemicals that are released, it's going to attract those white blood cells. So the white blood cell down here, the leukocyte, is going to come along. It's going to be attracted to the area. It's going to follow the chemical concentration. So the white blood cell is going to come along after it's formed, and it's going to start to roll along the wall of the blood vessel here. That's called margination. And then it's going to find a crack between the two cells, the endothelial cells of the blood vessel, and it's going to squeeze through, and it's going to make its way toward the damage, and then it's going to start carrying out its phagocytic functions. All right, so these are some of the inflammatory chemicals that we see released when your body is experiencing some sort of change, whether it be damage or introduction of something that might be harmful, and so on and so forth. So here, table 21.2 is a great summary of the innate body defenses, some of the things that your body has as its what we call the first line of defense. Then we have the second line of defense, which are the things that will keep your body infection-free if the pathogens make their way into the body. And some of these things we're going to talk about in just a little bit are these antimicrobial proteins. All right, so we are on page 2, letter D now. We're going to talk about interferon. Now, I already talked about how the viruses work. If you go into Blackboard, show you here. If you go on a Blackboard, you will see there's a video here that I posted on how a virus works. So you can check that out too. It's skip the ad. But anyway, there's a video that will show you how a virus works. I highly recommend that you check that out. It's a computer animation that'll show you that, and it does a really nice job of showing you a very concise and easy to understand explanation of how viruses work. So now, if we do have a virus that infects a cell, the virus is going to enter the cell, it's going to infect it, it's going to say, okay, you're going to make new viruses, you're going to do what I want you to do. Well, what's going to happen when that virus enters the cell is that it's going to also turn on a switch within the cell. It's called the interferon gene switch. And so what happens is that cell is going to produce an interferon that it's going to release. This is very similar to, let's say a person is working in a bank and a bank robber comes in and says, give me all your money. The teller is going to have at their station a little button that they push. Doesn't make any sound, doesn't do anything. So they're going to push the button and then they're going to go ahead and do what the robber asks because nobody wants to get killed. So you give them the money, give them whatever they want, and the robber leaves. Now, the robber got what they wanted, right? But when that happens, when they push the button, that silent button, now it's going to notify the police, who can notify other banks and other businesses and everybody around the area that there's a person that just robbed a bank and you might want to be careful or you might want to lock your doors. See? So that's what the interferon does. The interferon, it's not going to help the cell that's releasing the interferon, but it's telling all the cells that are nearby, hey, you may want to lock your doors because there's a virus coming around. So what happens is that interferon then is received by neighbor cells who are in the general vicinity, and then that cell will then create an antiviral messenger RNA, and then that antiviral protein that the cell produces is going to block the virus. So now that virus can't come in. The door is locked. It can't get in. So this is how the cells start to get one up on the viruses, but it takes a little bit of time because interferon doesn't travel throughout the entire body. It's localized. So it kind of has to travel in a wave from cell to cell. That's why viral infections, they just have to kind of run their course, but your body will take care of it for the most part. So that's your second term, interferon. Excuse me. We have another set of proteins that's called the complement system that will be active in helping your body's immune response, but also be involved in essentially poking a hole in the side of a cell to break it so that the cell is no longer viable. It'll kill the cell. So the way that the complement system gets activated, first of all, is through several different pathways, and you see them at the top. It doesn't really matter how it becomes active. What matters is that when it becomes active, what's going to happen is this protein here, which we call complement 3 or C3, it's going to break apart. And when that protein fragments, we're going to see that part of it, which is C3b, is going to enhance phagocytosis. It's going to coat the pathogen surfaces, making it easier for your body's immune structures to get at it. But you see it's also going to form a complex here with several other different complements that we see to sort of form a ring that inserts itself into the wall of the cell, which lyses the cell, pops a hole in it basically. C3a, along with these other C5, or part of C5, is going to enhance inflammation. So the complement mechanism, or the complement proteins, are designed to Number one, enhance your immune response. Number two, enhance your inflammation. And number three, poke a hole in the side of a cell. That's essentially what the complement system does. All right, before we get to the adaptive defenses, we just have one more thing to talk about, which is fever. So we have fever, which is a high body temperature, and it's a systemic response to microorganisms. So basically, the reason why we experience fever is it's the body's way of elevating the temperature to a level or to a temperature that is uncomfortable and not conducive to the further replication and the further proliferation of the pathogen. So a lot of times if a person has a bacterial infection, you'll see a fever. That's because the person's body is elevating in temperature to try to decrease the viability of the bacteria. The problem is we don't like it either. And so we are very uncomfortable. We don't feel good when we have a fever. And it's not good for our body's cells either. So if you have too high of a temperature, that can start to denature our own body's proteins, and it can be very, very serious or deadly. So so fever is something that we have to keep an eye on and keep it controlled. But otherwise, the fever is actually something that's beneficial for us to help us get better and to ward off the pathogens. All right, so let's move on to our adaptive defenses. Now, adaptive defenses are the defenses that your body has designed for specific pathogens. And so we're going to talk about several different types of adaptive defenses within the body. But at the heart of it is the concept of antigens. And we see here an antigen on your screen, and you can see that the antigen has different binding sites. These are basically receptors. No, back up. Sorry, these are what we call determinants. Sorry. So you can see one here is a sort of a triangular shape. Here, one is more of a round shape. This one's kind of like a peg. And the idea is that these are identifiers. These are identifiers and receptor sites for potentially certain antibodies. Now, this is a very generic example, but let's say that this antigen is found on a bacterium. See, what an antigen is it's a protein-based identification system. It's kind of like a name tag. And a lot of organic structures, a lot of living structures have antigens on them. That's just the way that organisms develop on this planet. So we have commonalities. One of the commonalities is that we all have antigens on ourselves, or if we're a single-celled organism, we still have antigens, which are like the name tags. Hello, I am a bacteria. Hello, I am a red blood cell, type A. Hello, I am a skin cell. I am a liver cell, whatever. But all of our cells have these name tags on them, these antigens. But there are some antigens that are part of us and some that are not part of us. And so we have structures within our body that do identification checks. Kind of like a security detail. Saying, can I check your ID, please? Okay, you're one of us. You belong here. Fine. Can I see your ID, please? Yes, you belong here. Fine. Can I see your ID, please? Okay, you do not belong here. And if we find something that doesn't belong here, we have mechanisms in place to take care of that. One of the things that we see that we do have available are these antibodies. And antibodies are designed to lock on to the antigen determinants through their binding sites as part of the immune response. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So a couple things about our immune system. And you see it at the top of page 3. Our adaptive defenses recognize and destroy the specific antigen that initiated the response. So again, it's specific to an antigen. So if there's an antigen of something that doesn't belong, your body will craft a specific response for that. Number 2, it's systemic. So if the body detects that there's an infection in your toe, it's going to alert your whole body, and your whole body is going to be on alert, not just at your toe. Similar to when September 11th happened. September 11th, it happened in New York, it happened in Washington, D.C., but the entire country was on alert because there was an attack. So that's the nature of the immune system. The immune system also has a memory. So after you expose it initially to this antigen, your body is going to develop an immunological memory that will remember that attack so that the next time that pathogen enters the body, there's a much quicker and a much stronger response. And we'll look at that. Now we have 2 different types of immunity that our body affords itself. One is called the humoral immunity. And the reason why we call it the humoral immunity is because back in the day, they used to call the fluids of the body the body's humors. So the humoral response is designed to provide us with protection when there's an infection that is in the body's fluids. So in the body's fluids, if there's a pathogen, we have the humoral response that's going to take care of that or respond to that. And then we also have what's called cell-mediated immunity or cellular immunity. And this is where we do cell-on-cell contact, just like that natural killer cell we saw before, where there's an infected cell. We have another cell that comes along and attaches to it and then destroys the infected cell. So one of the things that our body wants to determine, like I mentioned before, is whether it's a self-antigen or not. If it's a self-antigen, your body's immune system, for the most part, will leave it alone. And that's referenced at the middle of page 3, letter B, number 4. Okay, so let's just do a little bit of review, then we'll take a break, and then we will come back and we'll talk about the specific cells of the immune system. All right. So, what are some of the non-specific defenses of your body? Skin is one. What's another one? Yep, the mucous membranes. So skin and the mucous membranes are what we call the first line of defense, trying to keep things from getting inside the body. Now, if things get into the body, then we have the second line of defense. So what are some things that are part of the second line of defense? Phagocytes is one. It's another one.
Natural killer cells.
The natural killer cells, which are responsible for cell-on-cell combat. What else? Inflammation. And what are the 4 cardinal signs of inflammation? Redness, heat, swelling, and pain. Yes, those are 4 cardinal signs. What else? Interferons, the complement system, what category are they found in? What are they called? Antimicrobial proteins. You got it. Good, good. And
Fever.
Yep, and fever is the other one. Right, increased body temperature. Okay, so what would you define as an antigen? What does an antigen mean to you? What would you say an antigen is?
Identifier and receptor site for certain.
Yeah, this is great. So it's an identifier. It's like a name tag, and it's also has receptor sites for antibodies. Yes. So this is what drives your immune system, your adaptive immune system. It's doing identification checks, and if the check doesn't work out, then your body's immune system is going to come in and do something about it to try to neutralize or destroy or deactivate the pathogen. And so we have several different cells of the body that are going to carry that out. And after the break, we'll come back and we'll talk about those different types of cells and how they function and what they do and how they work to provide us with immunity. So we'll take 10 minutes and then we'll come back and then we'll pick up from there. All right, welcome back. So we're going to jump into looking at the cells of the immune system, and we're going to talk about a little bit how the cells of the immune system are trained and how they get to be specific and immunocompetent is what we call it, and then kind of go from there. So when we look at the cells of immunity, we have two different cell types. This is kind of hard to read. I love it. Better. All right. So when we look at the cells of immunity, we have two different cell types. We have what are called B cells, and we have T cells. Now, I'm not sure, it seems awfully coincidental if it's not, but I'm not sure why they call them T or B cells, but it's very handy if this isn't the reason why they're called that it turns out the way that it is. So all of these cells, the T and the B cells, are born in the bone marrow. So they form, they originated, they grow in the bone marrow. The B cells stay in the bone marrow. So it's easy to remember, B, bone. The T cells, they leave the bone marrow and they travel to the thymus. And it is in both the bone marrow and the thymus that they mature, that they become immunocompetent, that they learn what they need to do in order to be a full-fledged working T cell or B cell. Once they get their education, then what they do is they travel to the lymph node and other lymphatic structures, and then that's where they do their job. So some lymphocytes, because these are both what they call the T and B cells, T and B lymphocytes more specifically or more correctly, some of these lymphocytes have antigen receptors, and then they can bind to the foreign antigen, and when that happens, they become activated, and then they proliferate, they differentiate. They say, okay, we need more of you, and so then they make more cells, which are called effector cells and memory cells, and then they help the body through its immune response. So the training that has to occur for T cells in the thymus is pretty stringent. So they have to go through two different tests. And if they fail this test, they're either going to become inactivated, so they don't have any effect on anything in the body, or they're deleted, which means that they're killed. They die off. So first of all, the first test that the T cells have to pass, as it says in this picture, is they have to recognize the self-major histocompatibility proteins, meaning it has to recognize the proteins and the fragments of a cell that are part of our own body's cells. They have to recognize that. And so the way that they show that is through this structure here. See, so they have what they call an antigen presenting thymic cell. So the thymus's own cells are going to have little testers, and it's this little part here, and you can see how it has a certain structure to it. It's like blocks. But you'll notice that the T cell receptor, this particular one, doesn't have a shape that matches up exactly to that. You see that? How it's not a tight fit? So if it's not a tight fit, it fails the test and says, okay, you failed miserably, just go and kill yourself. And then the cell will be in this pre-programmed cell death, so the cell will commit suicide. It's kind of a rough schooling. But if it does fit, like you see here, a nice fit, then we're good. Check, you passed. Okay? So then they get to see the next test. So the next test is negative selection. Now, the T cells must not recognize a self-antigen. Now, what this means is that it cannot recognize your body's own antigen as foreign. All right? So basically, if I take, I mean, he's dead now, but I always use this example. If I take a picture of Osama bin Laden and I hold it up so it covers my face, which one of you in this room is going to come and attack me or call the police or FBI because Osama bin Laden's in the room? You wouldn't do that, right? Because you know it's a picture that I'm just holding up in front of my face, right? Yes. So that's like this test. You're holding up a picture and saying, look, it's me, it's the bad guy. And the T cell's supposed to say, yeah, right. It's just you. And then they go on and they go to some other cell. See? So the cell has to do this. What you don't want the cell to do is to say, oh my gosh, it's Osama bin Laden. And then they attack, you know, like it's actually the guy. So that's what you don't want to see. And so here what they're showing in this picture is a really tight lock. You see how it's a really, really tight fit on that pill-shaped brown structure there? You don't want that. You want a loose fit. See? So it says, yeah. You're just holding that picture up. It's not really you. I know who it really is. That's what you want your cells to do. So number one, you want them to recognize the body's own proteins. Number two, you don't want it to react to a self-antigen as if the antigen is foreign. And if it passes both of those tests, then this antigen, you passed, you're good to go, you're immunocompetent, and now you can go off to the lymph node and you can look for antigens that don't belong here. Because we know that if you come across one of your own body's cells, you won't attack it. You won't try to kill it. Sometimes this does happen, though, and that's what we call an autoimmune response, which is not desirable. All right, so think about this whole thing that we just talked about with presenting an antigen that is self or non-self, holding the picture up and saying, hey, I'm the bad guy, woo, you know, come and get me. Well, these cells that are capable of presenting antigens to the T cells and B cells are called antigen-presenting cells. And antigen-presenting cells are very important because what they're going to do a lot of times is they're going to process, they're going to destroy the pathogen, but they're going to take part of that pathogen and then they're going to stick it out of themselves to show it to a T cell or B cell and say, hey, just so you know, this is who I found. So you might want to be on the lookout for more of these guys. So that's what the antigen presenting cells are. And what they do is they activate the T cells. So this is a dendritic cell. A dendritic cell is an example of an antigen presenting cell. We also see macrophages are antigen presenting cells, and actually B cells also present antigens to the T helper cells so that they can become more fully activated. So the B cells need a basically like they have like checks and balances. They start to become activated, but they have to present to a T helper cell, and then they become fully activated to do what they do. So let's look at the humoral immunity that our body has. So what we see here is we have what are called immunocompetent but naive B lymphocytes. So it means that they have the capability to host an immune response, but they haven't come across anything to cause them to respond yet. It's kind of like a soldier that's trained to fight, but it hasn't seen anybody to fight yet. So when this B cell does come into contact with an antigen in the body's fluids, now the antigen will bind to the receptor on that B lymphocyte, and those will start to clone themselves. Notice how we have the antigen, and it doesn't fit on this one. It doesn't fit on this one. It only fits on the middle one. So this middle one became active now, and it starts to create clones. Some of these cells will differentiate into what we call plasma cells, which are effector cells when they become activated. These are not the B cells themselves that initially became active. These are effector cells that become created, and their job is to secrete antibody, and that antibody can kind of immobilize the original antigen. But we also produce memory B cells so that the next time we come into contact with the same antigen, now we have a more rapid response and a stronger response. So these memory B cells after the infection stick around, and if we ever come across the same antigen, boom, we make out those plasma cells and we start secreting antibody and we're off. So this is what we call immunological memory. Oh, before we get there, here's the term helper. We'll talk about immunological memory in just a little bit here and why it helps us. Did you get the term? We're good? Okay. All right, so before I go to the immunological memory, here's an overview of the T and the B lymphocytes, what kind of immune response, whether they secrete antibodies, the primary targets, where they're born, where they mature, so on and so forth. All right, so we're not done with this yet. We're still talking about the T lymphocytes in a little bit, but let's talk about this, the immunological memory and why it helps us. Okay, so what this picture is trying to show us here. So let's say there's an antigen and we become exposed to that antigen here on day 0. It takes about 5 days for your body to even start to mount an immune response to this, meaning that we secrete antibodies, and then at its peak, we're at about 10 to the first power here, so 10. This is the antibody titer, so it's like the antibody concentration in the body, okay? So the concentration is just a little over 10. Then, as we go on, several weeks later, we get back down to our original level. Antibodies basically break down. They stick around. They only have they have a limited life span, so they don't live forever. So as they start to die off and no longer are viable, then the antibody titer comes down. Now, if you introduce that same antibody to the body again, it's not even a day and you're already mounting a response. And then when you hit the peak, look at the response compared to before. Much quicker, much stronger. It's kind of like you caught us with our pants down the first time, but second time we're ready. We're ready to go. This is why people get immunizations. This is why immunizations work for us. Because what you're doing is you're introducing either a dead or a weak pathogen to the body. Its antigens come into contact with our body's immune system. We build memory cells. So that if you come into contact with it, boom, it's there and it wipes it out. You don't even realize you have it, or you don't get it. So every time your body is exposed to a new antigen that it hasn't been exposed to before, it's that initial response, and it's that delayed response, and it's that weak response that is ineffective that leaves your body susceptible. So speaking of immunity, there's different types of immunity. There's active and passive immunity. So active immunity, there's two different types. There's a naturally acquired active immunity and an artificially acquired active immunity. Naturally acquired active immunity is you get the pathogen. So the most common way this happens is someone's sick, and then a few days later, you get the same thing they had. You get sick too. But now you build immunity to that. So you get infected with the pathogen. You have contact with the pathogen. Artificially acquired would be a vaccination. So you're actively acquiring immunity. Now, we can also passively acquire immunity. So, for example, if a mother nurses her infant shortly after birth, or while the baby is still inside the mother as a fetus, you can pass those antibodies on to the other person. Or artificially acquired, passively, you can get an injection of antibodies called a gamma globulin to help give you a boost to your immune system as well. So this is why a lot of mothers like to nurse their infant, at least for a little bit, because they're passing antibodies on to their child. And what I always say, and I mentioned this earlier in class, but I'll mention it again, you have to remember that this doesn't mean that your child is going to be healthier for the rest of its life because you did this. It just means that as long as those antibodies are present and alive and viable, it gives you that little bit of a boost. But it's not a lifetime advantage that you provide to your child. So the antibodies that we produce all are very common in their structure. They have a heavy chain and a light chain that are bonded together through disulfide bonds. And we have different types of them. So let me go to the different types and I'll come back to that picture. So that we have IgM, IgA, and usually about the second one down, it tells you what this one is responsible for doing or what it does. IgD, B cell antigen receptor. IgG, IgE, allergic reaction. So these are the different types of antibodies. You have 5 of them. And some become elevated because, like I said, if you're looking for an allergic reaction, you should see an increase in IgE as an example. All right, so these are the different things that antibodies can do. An antibody can neutralize by masking the dangerous parts of a bacterial endotoxin or the dangerous part of a virus. It can cause agglutination, causing clumping of the red blood cells, for example. Cause precipitation, can activate the complement, can enhance phagocytosis or inflammation, or can lead to cell lysis. So these are all the different things that antibodies have their hands in doing and what they provide for the body. All right, so those are the B cells. Now we have the T cells. This is the bottom page 5, the cellular immune response. We have 2 major types of T cells. we have what are called CD4 cells, and we have CD8 cells. And they basically, they have different functions. So the ones that you see on the left here, the CD4 cell, they will eventually become helper cells or regulatory T cells. So these are going to basically give you the checks and balances that help the immune response, to tell the B cells, yep, it's okay, go ahead and activate, or to confirm that there's an infection, or to have interaction with the cytotoxic T cell to help the cytotoxic T cell become activated. Over here on the right side, the CD8 cells become the cytotoxic T cells. These are the ones that participate in cell-on-cell combat, killing infected cells. So as you see in your notes, the CD4 cells become helper T cells. And they're going to either activate the B cells or the T cells or the macrophages, or they'll help moderate the immune response. Now, remember we have that major histocompatibility complex protein, the self protein, that kind of sticks out of the cell, and then from that the antigen gets stuck out. We have two different classes here. We have an MHC, the class 2 here, that the CD4 cell responds to, and then we have a class 1 that the CD8 cell is going to respond to. So the class 1 MHCs are found in all the body cells except for red blood cells. And it says, you know, it displays antigen from within the cell or fragments of foreign antigens. The class 2 MHCs are only found on cells that present antigens to CD4 cells. All right, so let's look at what's happening here. This table does a great job of summarizing what we're going to talk about here. So if you look at over here, the class 1 cells, all the nucleated cells of the body present class 1 MHCs. Whereas the class 2s usually are presented by the antigen presenting cells. Okay? Okay. So here's the difference. That the MHC class 1 proteins usually are going to present an endogenous pathogen or protein, meaning that it comes from within the body. So for example, if you have a cancer cell is one of your cells. Or if we have an intracellular pathogen, like a virus, for example, that's infecting the inside of a cell. So if the infection comes from within the cell itself, then we're going to be dealing with the class 1 MHC. However, for the class 2, it's exogenous, comes from outside the body. All right, so this is really nice to see down here because it really helps summarize it. So if you're not going to look at anything else on this picture, look at the bottom, because it says here, if the type 1 MHC is presented by an antigen presenting cell, this is what it says. I belong to you, okay? I'm one of you, but I have captured something foreign, and this is what it looks like. Kill any cell that displays it. That's kind of like, hey, I captured a terrorist, and this is what they're wearing. So if you see anybody wearing this, make sure you kill it, okay? That's really what the cell is saying. Or if it's displayed by any other body cell, which you see here, it says, I belong to you, but now there's something wrong with me. Kill me, okay? That's what they're saying. So if it's a body cell that comes up to the CD8 cell and it says, hey, look, I'm sick, please just put me out of my misery, okay? Boom, it'll do that. Or if it's one of those cells that comes along and says, hey, I'm helping you out. Look what I found. Look what I caught. here it is. Be on the lookout for these, and if you see any of these, kill them. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Over here, though, on the class 2 side, again, this is something that's coming from outside the body, so like a bacteria. Okay, it says, hey, I'm one of you guys, but look, I've captured somebody who doesn't belong here, and this is what it looks like. I'm going to keep going after these guys, but I want your help. Okay, so this is kind of the interaction that's going on here. But I think this is awesome. Down here at the bottom, right here, this is awesome. Make sure you keep that as a reference. Make sure you jot that down somewhere so it helps you with your understanding of what's going on. Okay, so here's the class 2 MHC protein. So look, we had an antigen from the bacteria. So this dendritic cell engulfed the bacterium, broke it apart, and then it presented the antigen. But remember, it says, hey, look what I found. I destroyed this, and it looks like this. I'm going after more of these, but I want your help. Okay? So it displays that protein. Now the antigen is presented, and the CD4 T cell comes along, and it binds to that MHC class 2, and it also locks on to that antigen. It says, okay, this is the antigen. Now, it's not a self-antigen. It's not one of my body type, not one, my own body's antigens. So now this is my goal. So now this is the bad guy that I will always, always, always go after. So now it learns who its enemy is. And then it becomes memory cells and helper T cells. But at the same time, we're going to see co-stimulation. It's going to confirm to this antigen presenting cell. Good, got it, I understand. Let's get it done. So what do the helper T cells do? Once it identifies that there's a pathogen, if it comes up to a CD8 cell, a cytotoxic T cell, it's going to bind. Wait, let's see here. Helper T cell. Oh, this is a B cell. Sorry, back up. So if it comes along another B cell, it's going to bind to that B cell, and it's going to send chemicals across that are going to say, okay, B cell, we've got this guy. Yep, I found him too. I came across someone who was telling me that there was an infection. Yep, you can go ahead. You got my rubber stamp. Go ahead, go after it, and let's get rid of that bacteria. So what you did is you completed the activation of the B cell. Or over here, if we have a cytotoxic T cell that's binding to an antigen presenting cell through the MHC class 1, the helper T cell is going to come along and it's going to stimulate and activate the CD8 cell. So it's going to come along here, it's going to lock on, and it's going to say, yep, we've got the fragment here. It's going to send the chemicals across, and it's going to activate this T cell here. So the helper cells basically help mediate the immune response, make sure the immune response doesn't get out of control. It's also going to activate the B cells, and it's going to help stimulate the activation of the T cells. Now, if this seemed like overwhelming or not really understandable, go back to the interaction on Blackboard, because they explain it step by step by step, and they show you an animation that's really good. So make sure you check that out. What the cytotoxic T cells do, like I mentioned before, the cytotoxic T cells are responsible for cell-on-cell combat, killing cells that are infected. So what's going to happen is the T cell is going to lock onto the infected cell. It's going to release these chemicals, perforin and granzyme. So the perforin is going to form the little holes, very similar to the complement system. And then the granzyme will get peppered in through those holes and basically eat the cell from the inside. So you're going to first make the hole, and then you're going to introduce the granzyme through the holes so that you're basically digesting the cell from inside out. So it's going to kill the cell. So in your notes, you talked about these things called cytokines. And cytokines are defined as these secretions that help amplify the immune response. We already mentioned the interferons, but we have some other things like interleukin and suppressor factors and tumor growth factors. So these are just examples of the cytokines, the immune chemicals that are secreted through the body to help enhance the immune function. So this is a summary of what happens within the body as far as its immune response. Way up at the beginning, we have, at the top here, we have the innate defenses. Remember, we have the surface barriers, the skin, the mucous membranes, the internal defenses. We have the complement system, we have fever, we have inflammation, we have the phagocytes, you name it. But then we have the adaptive defenses. And the adaptive defenses all start with antigens. Antigens coming into contact with the body's cells. So if we have a phagocyte that comes into contact with the pathogen, it breaks it apart, and now we process the antigen. We present the antigen to the CD8 cells. We also present the antigen to the CD4 cells. CD4 cells become activated, which help co-stimulate and activate the CD8 cells so that they can produce their own memory cells, but also produce cytotoxic T cells that will go off and kill any infected cells. The helper T cells are also going to help co-stimulate the B cell, telling the B cell that it's okay to go ahead and create its plasma cells and its memory cells. We also have our memory CD4 cells. So, if the B cell becomes activated, it needs a confirmation from the CD4, the helper T cell, saying, yep, we're good to go. Then it will produce its own memory cells and plasma cells, which secrete antibodies. So you can see the body has several different approaches to go after pathogens. And they all happen at the same time. It's not that it goes through step 1, then step 2, then step 3. It happens all at the same time. Your body's going to be going through inflammation and fever and cell-mediated immunity, cell and cell combat. Plus, you're going to have the secretion of antibodies. This is all happening at the same time. You're just going at it with different weapons to try to neutralize and try to deactivate and try to eliminate the pathogen. So that's essentially what we're looking at. The last thing that we talk about are grafts, which is taking a tissue and implanting it or transplanting it to another, either on the same person or another animal. And so I just have a few definitions at the bottom of page 6. We have autografts, so you take a tissue graft, you transplant it from one body site to another on the same person. Maybe like a skin graft, someone suffers from a severe burn or something like that. Isografts, so if you have a genetically identical individual, like an identical twin, you can donate a tissue to them. Allografts, non-genetically identical individuals, same species. So if you received like a heart transplant, kidney transplant, something like that, that would be considered an allograft. And then a xenograft is a graft taken from another animal species. So if you get like a pig valve, in your heart or something like that, that would be an example of a xenograft. The trouble with those is that those grafts are non-self, most of those. And so then you have to take immunosuppressive agents so that your body's immune system doesn't attack what it views as the foreign component in the body. So it leaves your body susceptible to other things as well. So in summary, if you want a really nice table that's going to summarize what the cells of the immune response are as far as the adaptive immune response, this table gives you a really good idea of what they do. And make sure you look at that. Okay. Let's close out of that. Go to here. Okay. So we talked, before we took the break, we talked about antigens. So let's talk about T cells and B cells. So where are the T cells and B cells born? Where do they originate?
Bone marrow.
Bone marrow. And then where do each cell, what does each cell type do? Where does it go for to mature and to be trained?
Thymus is the T.
Thymus for the T cells, and where the B cells go?
Bone marrow.
Yeah, they stay in the bone marrow. Okay, so let's say we have a T cell in the thymus, and it's being tested. What's the first test? It's called positive selection. Okay, and what happens during positive selection?
You have to recognize the proteins.
Yes, they have to recognize the self-MHC protein. Yes. So they have to recognize a self protein. If they don't, what happens?
They die.
Yep. You got to go kill yourself. Okay. Easy enough. Okay, so if it passes that, then what's the next step? What's that called?
Negative selection.
Negative selection. And what happens during negative selection?
Selects T cells that do not recognize self-MHC.
Not the self-MHC, it is the self-antigen. So your thymus cell is going to present a self-antigen. Or that was the example where I held up a picture and said, hey, it's this guy. Well, the cell has to make sure that it doesn't attack its own antigens.
The notes said protein. Just
Does it say protein?
yeah, that I read it right from the notes.
I tell you, huh? What page are we on there?
I don't know. I typed
Bottom
it.
of 3.
Bottom of 3. Okay.
Self-MHC.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, it should be this the self-antigens. Thanks for catching that. Bottom page 3. Change it to self-antigens. Yeah, so it's a self-antigen. So then it's going to present an antigen, much like the antigen presenting cell is going to do, except it's going to present one of basically an identification of themselves. So it's going to say, hey, what if you saw this guy? And if the T cell fails, it's going to say, why'd attack him? That would be a fail. You have to say, well, I wouldn't attack because I know that's one of us. So that's the test. And then they go to the lymphoid organs or structures to work. All right. So what do B cells do when they become active? Activated, what do they do?
Use that antigens to help helper T cells. No.
No, the B cells don't do that. When they become active, they just start doing what they're supposed to do. And what I'm looking for is, what do they differentiate into? So when a T cell becomes activated, it's going to start to differentiate into 2 different types of cells. What are those 2 different types of cells? One is going to secrete lots of antibodies, and the other one is going to stick around for a long time, so that if you ever get infected by the same agent again, your body's immune response is quicker. So what would those two cells be?
Dendritic cells.
Nope, not dendritic cells.
Primary and secondary.
Nope. Figure 2111, this one. Two different types of cells right here. We have the effector B cells, which are called plasma cells, and we have the memory cells. See? So that's what the B cells will become. So that would be page 4. Roman numeral number 5, letter A, numbers 2 and 3.
That's
Okay.
what the T cells become?
What's that?
You said that's what the T cells become?
The B cells.
The
When the
B
B cells become activated, they create plasma cells and memory cells. They clone themselves, and then those clones become those cells. So what are the two different types of T cells?
That's the dendritic.
Nope. Dendritic cells are phagocytes, and those are antigen presenting cells.
Helper and cytotoxic.
Yeah, the helper T cell comes. Helper T cell is in one category. The cytotoxic T cell is the other.
CD4, CD8.
Yeah, CD4 and CD8. So the CD4 cell is the helper T cell. The CD8 T cell is the cytotoxic T cell. So what does a helper T cell do?
Activate B cells.
Activates B cells. What else?
Great immune response.
Moderates the immune response. Yep, exactly. What does cytotoxic T cells do?
Destroy cells.
Yep, they destroy infected cells. So again, I would go back to that diagram, that table in your book, and I want to find that again because that was really helpful. Table 21.5, that bottom part of that table, that's really helpful. All right. What questions do you have? Anything that you are seeking clarification on, or that you're a little bit confused on? We're okay? We're okay? All right.
Does each blood type have its own antigen? Like, is that why you can't?
Yeah, the question was, does each blood type have its own antigen? Yes, the red blood cells have antigens. So they would be like the ABO antigens. So type A, type B, type O. So a type A red blood cell would have A antigens. Type B would have type B. Type AB would have A and B, and type O has no antigens. And then corresponding with that, you have the antibodies. So if you're a person who has type A red blood cells, you have the A antigen, but you have anti-B antibodies in your blood. So if you ever introduced a B antigen or a B type of blood cell into your own blood, then the antibodies would go after that. Type B red blood cells or type B type blood people, type B blood individuals have anti-A antibodies in their blood, in their plasma. Type AB have no antibodies, because if they did, then their own antibodies would attack their own red blood cells. And then type O, they have anti-A and anti-B antibodies in their plasma because there are no antigens on the red blood cells. So AB is the universal recipient because there are no antibodies in their plasma, so they can take anything. Type O would be the universal donor because you could take the non-antigen containing, basically the generic, the unnamed red blood cell and put it in anybody.
So like if a woman were to get pregnant and like her baby isn't the same blood type, like would that get attacked per se?
When you're talking about-
because I'm O negative.
Yes.
So like I know when I go to have a baby, I have to have like some RH hemoglobin injection
Yeah.
to like neutralize
Yes.
everything.
Yes.
And like that's why, because like just otherwise my body would just attack it.
Correct. So in addition to the ABO, the question was, in case you didn't hear it, was in regard to women who are pregnant with a child who may have a different blood type. So we have two different blood types that we're concerned with our blood. We have the ABO group, which I just described, and then there's also the RH. So you're either RH positive or RH negative. RH positive means you have the RH antigen on your red blood cells. RH negative means you do not. So if you are O negative, it means that you are type O, meaning you have no ABO antigens on your red blood cell, and negative, meaning that you have no RH. So your red blood cells are basically clean. They don't have any antigens on them. So you would be like a wonderful, like the universal donor. Everybody could take your blood. You'd be like a wonderful blood donor. But the thing is, if you were to have a child that was RH positive, what would happen when you deliver that baby is that your blood and the baby's blood would have a chance of interacting with each other. And because you're introducing a foreign antigen to your body's plasma, now your body will develop anti-RH antibodies within its plasma, which isn't going to hurt you at all. But if you ever have another child who again is RH positive, now your anti-RH antibodies that were developed could potentially attack the red blood cells of the fetus. So that's why you get the injection. The injection is designed to prevent you from creating those antibodies so that your body does not do harm upon the fetus's body. So that's what they do. So I'm guessing you got two, right? One before you gave birth and one after?
I haven't had kids.
Oh, you haven't
But
had kids.
So
So if you were to have children, then that'd probably be the case. You get like one before you deliver and one after. Yep. Yeah. But if you are O positive, for example, like my wife is O positive, no problem. Because you won't develop the anti-RH antibodies because your body, because it's already accustomed to having the RH antigen in the blood. So your body's going to say, yeah, this is what we deal with all the time. So yeah, that's why. Interesting, right? Yeah. Any other questions? All right, thanks.